They left me for dead in a mangled heap of steel, laughing as they called the cops to frame their own blood. While I suffocated in the rain, my family toasted champagne on a first-class flight to Paris, celebrating the erasure of Karis Wilson. But a ghost doesn't stay buried, especially one with the receipts. Long before the sirens and the betrayal, however, it started with a different kind of suffocation. The humidity in the woodlands always feels like a physical weight, a thick, invisible curtain that clings to everything it touches. Tonight, the air was particularly heavy, saturated by the scent of pine needles and the looming threat of a Texas thunderstorm. I stood by the grand mahogany mirror in the foyer, my fingers steady as I reached up to adjust Warwick's silk tie. He didn't look at me. He looked through me, his eyes focused on his own reflection, checking the sharpness of his jawline, the prestige of his silhouette. To him, I wasn't a daughter in this moment. I was an extension of the furniture, a silent gear in the machine he called a family. The mansion hummed with the high-pitched clinking of crystal and the practiced laughter of Houston's elite. This gala, celebrating 35 years of my parents' marriage, all was a masterpiece of opulence. Every white orchid, every bottle of vintage Bollinger, every hand-carved ice sculpture had been paid for by my latest quarterly bonus, the result of 80-hour work weeks and algorithms I had bled over for months. Yet, as I smoothed the silk over Warwick's chest, he merely grunted a command about the luggage. Have you ever stood in a room full of people you love, only to realize you are the only one actually present? I walked through the ballroom, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble, a sound that felt like a countdown. I checked the catering staff, whispered directions to the valet, and managed the fragile egos of my parents' associates. Astria caught my arm as I passed, her grip surprisingly tight for a woman holding a flute of champagne. She leaned in, her perfume cloying and sharp. Karis, a dear. The 1996 vintage is slightly over-chilled. Try to be more attentive. This is an important night for your father's reputation. I looked at her, seeing the worry lines she tried so hard to hide beneath layers of expensive foundation. I didn't remind her that I had spent my entire weekend ensuring this night was perfect. I simply nodded. My grandfather used to say that the true measure of a person isn't what they take from the world, but what they can endure without losing their gentleness. I wasn't being weak. I was being the person they had forgotten how to be. The quiet pressure of the evening began to boil when I retreated to the study to check my final presentation for the French conglomerate. The data on my laptop was the culmination of my career, a digital legacy I intended to use to finally secure my own independence, and I heard the door creak open. Valora stood there, her designer gown shimmering like snake scales under the dim library lights. She held a glass of Cabernet, her smile not reaching her eyes. Still working, Karis? You really should learn to live a little. You're becoming so dull. Before I could respond, her hand tilted with a practiced, predatory grace. The deep red liquid cascaded over the keyboard in a slow-motion nightmare. I heard the agonizing hiss of short-circuiting electronics, a digital death rattle that signaled the erasure of months of work. Valora gasped, a theatrical, hollow sound. Oh, goodness! I am so clumsy. I'm so sorry, Karis. I hope that wasn't anything important. She didn't move to help. She simply watched the red stain spread, her eyes dancing with a sick sort of satisfaction. She knew exactly what she had done. This wasn't an accident. It was a declaration of war disguised as a mistake. I stared at the black screen, my reflection staring back at me, pale, composed, and dangerously still. I didn't scream. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply looked up at my sister and felt a profound sense of clarity. When our parents rushed in, drawn by Valora's fake apology, Astria didn't even look at the ruined machine. She looked at her watch. Don't make a scene, Karis. It's just a computer. Your sister is fragile tonight. The stress of the trip is getting to her. Clean this mess up and get the SUV ready. We have a flight to catch in 2 hours. Warwick stood in the doorway, his silhouette imposing and cold. Karis, your little numbers game is fine for a hobby, but it doesn't compare to the legacy of this family. Stop being difficult. We need to be at IAH by midnight. I looked at the ruined hardware, then at the people who shared my blood, but not my soul. Value isn't stored in a machine, Mother, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. It's stored in the mind that built it. I can rebuild the data easily enough, but I can't rebuild a conscience for those who never possessed one. They didn't even flinch at the weight of my words. They simply turned and walked toward the door, leaving me to handle the wreckage. The storm finally broke as I loaded the last of the heavy suitcases into the back of the black SUV. The rain came down in sheets, a torrential Texas downpour that blurred the lines between the road and the sky. I was exhausted, my muscles aching from the physical and emotional labor of the day, yet I took the driver's seat without a word of protest. Again behind me, the car was filled with the sounds of their excitement. Valora planning her shopping spree in Paris. Warwick discussing the business deals he intended to close using my stolen insights. They treated me like a chauffeur, barking orders about the temperature and the music. As I merged onto the rain-slicked F45, the tires hissed against the asphalt. I checked the rearview mirror, ensuring everyone's seatbelt was fastened, a reflex of care that felt increasingly like a burden. Love shouldn't feel like a debt that can never be paid. Yet here I was, still trying to protect the very people who had just celebrated my loss. The headlights of a heavy truck appeared behind us, growing larger at a terrifying rate. It was moving too fast for the conditions, ignoring the white-knuckle grip everyone else had on the road. I gripped the steering wheel, the leather cold and unforgiving beneath my palms. My heart began to drum a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a primal warning I couldn't ignore. The truck wasn't slowing down. It was accelerating, a wall of steel and light bearing down on us through the gray curtain of the storm. I looked at my family in the mirror, Valora on her phone, my parents whispering to each other, unaware that the life I had so carefully built was about to collide with a reality none of us were prepared for. The twin predators in the rearview mirror didn't just haunt the road, they were gaining. Every time the wipers cleared the windshield, the glare of those high beams seemed to double in size. The cabin of the black SUV felt smaller now, the air thick with a tension that surpassed the storm outside. But I could feel the rhythmic pulse of my own blood in my temples. My hands were locked onto the leather steering wheel at 10 and 2. The leather felt cold. It felt like a warning. Behind me, the muffled sounds of a lifestyle I had funded continued unabated. My father was checking his watch. My mother was smoothing her skirt. Warwick, we need to talk about the trust fund withdrawals, I said. My voice was low. It was steady. I didn't need to shout to be heard in that confined space. The rustle of paper in the back seat stopped instantly. I saw my father's eyes shift in the mirror. He didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. Karis, this isn't the time for an audit, he snapped. We have a flight to catch. I didn't back down. I had seen the ledger. I knew about the $50,000. It wasn't an audit. It was an autopsy of my trust. It's not stealing when it's an investment in your sister's future, Warwick added. His tone was dismissive. He said it as if it were a universal truth. Beside him, Astria nodded. She didn't even look up from her phone. I felt a smoldering heat in my chest that had nothing to do with the car's heater. It was the realization that my value was purely transactional to them. I was the architect of their comfort, yet I was treated like a trespasser in my own life. Integrity isn't something you can buy with stolen money, Dad. It's the only thing you own when everything else is gone. Valora leaned forward suddenly, her voice high and panicked. Karis, you're driving too fast. Look at that truck. She pointed toward the side window. I glanced. There was no truck on the right. It was a distraction. A practiced, a sharp needle of chaos designed to break my focus. "Slow down, Karis, you're going to kill us!" Valora screamed. She wasn't scared. She was performing. I reached out and adjusted the climate control for Astria. I did it instinctively. It was a small act of kindness I shouldn't have offered. It was the last ghost of the daughter I used to be. Then the world turned white. The roar of a high-performance engine drowned out Valora's scream. I didn't see the impact. I felt it. It was a surgical, bone-deep shudder that began at the driver's door. The screech of metal on metal was deafening. It sounded like the earth was tearing open. My head snapped toward the window as the glass shattered into 10,000 diamonds. Then came the spin. The SUV felt weightless. It was a terrifying slow-motion dance across 3 lanes of rain-slicked asphalt. Silence followed. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the clicking of a cooling engine and the rhythmic slap of rain on the roof. I was pinned. My left side felt like it had been crushed under a mountain. Everything was hazy. A red veil began to slide over my vision. I couldn't move my legs. I could see the dashboard lights flickering. They looked like dying stars. I tried to draw a breath. It felt like swallowing broken glass. I turned my head slightly. I expected to see panic. I expected to hear my mother's voice calling my name. Instead, I saw efficiency. My father was already out of the back seat. He wasn't checking my pulse. He was reaching into the mangled debris of the trunk. He pulled out the black box containing my server-linked laptop. Valora followed him. She didn't look at my injuries. She leaned over me, her face inches from mine. "This is where you stop being the perfect one, Karis," she whispered. Her voice was cold. It was satisfied. Astria was already on her phone. She was standing several feet away in the rain. Her voice transformed. It became a masterclass in theatrical terror. "Help! Please help! My daughter! She's drunk!" Astria cried into the receiver. "She attacked us while she was driving. We had to jump out. We're terrified for our lives." I watched her. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even groan. She was building a loophole. In Texas, leaving the scene is a felony, unless you claim you fled out of fear for your safety. She wasn't saving her daughter. She was saving her vacation. They didn't look back. Warwick signaled to a black car waiting behind the wrecked vehicle. It was the same car that had been following us. It was the rear-view mirror predator. Valora paused for a second. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a bottle of fine whiskey. She opened the bottle. She poured a large amount of whiskey onto my clothes. Then she tucked the bottle into the gap between my seat and the car door. "Now, have fun, little one," she said. She didn't smile. She just walked away. The footsteps faded. The taillights of their escape vehicle disappeared into the gray curtain of the Texas deluge. I was alone in the smoking wreckage. The rain began to leak through the shattered sunroof. It felt cold on my face. It felt like reality. I didn't scream for them to come back. I didn't cry. I remembered what my grandfather told me about the forge. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire, but it's the quietest blade that cuts the deepest. I wasn't dying. I was being tempered. Would you stay to save a family that just framed you for a crime? Or would you let the rain wash away your loyalty? This is the question that echoed in the silence of the cabin. I looked at the rearview mirror. It was cracked. It was hanging by a wire. But the tiny, pin-sized lens of the hidden camera was still there. It was still blinking red. My family forgot that I was a woman of data. They forgot that I never trusted a system I didn't build myself. My hand twitched. It was a small movement. In the distance, the blue and red lights of a state trooper cruiser appeared. The sirens were a mournful howl in the storm. The officer approached with his gun drawn. He saw the whiskey bottle. He saw the red veil on my face. He didn't see a victim. He saw the monster my mother had described on the phone. And I didn't close my eyes. I watched him. I let the cold air fill my lungs. I was waiting. I watched the taillights of their escape disappear into the gray curtain of rain, my heart slowing down not from the injury, but from the sudden, freezing realization that I no longer had a family to go back to. The rhythmic, mechanical hiss of the ventilator was the first thing that anchored me to the world. It was a cold, alien sound that didn't belong to the humid nights of Houston or the hum of my office. My right wrist felt heavy, a cold pressure biting into my skin that wasn't the ache of a broken bone. I forced my eyes open, the sterile white glare of the hospital room burning into my retinas. The ceiling tiles were a grid of indifference. I tried to lift my arm, but the unmistakable rattle of stainless steel against a metal bed rail stopped me cold. A single handcuff tethered me to the bed like a piece of evidence. I didn't panic. I didn't scream. My grandfather used to tell me that when the storm is at its peak, the only way to survive is to become the lighthouse. I breathed through the pain in my ribs, my mind already cataloging the reality of the room. A Houston Police Department officer sat by the door, his focus on a newspaper, his presence a silent declaration of my status. I wasn't Karis, the daughter who had just survived a nightmare. I was Karis, the suspect. The nurses moved with a clinical chill, their eyes avoiding mine, their hands performing their duties with a practiced, judgmental distance. They had heard the story my mother told, the story of a drunk driver who nearly killed her own parents. "Officer," I said, my voice a dry rasp that felt like sandpaper. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "I need to speak with my attorney." He stood up, towering over the bed, his hand resting instinctively on his belt. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Miss Wilson. Your parents are lucky to be alive." I looked at him, my gaze level and unshaken despite the red haze behind my eyes. "I understand you have a job to do, but I choose to speak only when my counsel is present. Silence is the only thing that can't be misquoted." I saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. He expected a weeping girl. He found a woman of iron. I turned my head to the window, watching the gray Texas dawn bleed into the sky. A lie can travel halfway around the world, while the truth is still putting on its shoes. My mother's lie was already halfway to the Atlantic. I didn't feel hatred for the man guarding my door. He was just a tool in a game he didn't understand. My focus was on the evidence. I knew my body was clean. I knew the blood tests would show 0 alcohol. But I also knew that in the court of public opinion, a mother's voice carries more weight than a daughter's data, until the data is weaponized. The room remained silent for hours until the officer stepped out for a shift change. I managed to reach my phone with my free hand. The screen cracked but functional. The blue light illuminated the shadows under my eyes as I opened the apps I had tried to ignore. My thumb hovered over Valora's profile. There it was, a selfie from 30,000 feet, framed by the golden light of a first-class cabin. She was holding a champagne flute, her eyes artistically rimmed with red, a single tear captured in high definition, while the caption was a masterpiece of digital crucifixion. Leaving with a shattered heart. We had to choose our safety over our love for my sister. Pray for her soul. I scrolled through the comments, each one a fresh cut. Total strangers were calling for me to be locked away. They were praising my parents for their bravery in reporting me. I found a video Valora had posted, a brief clip of her clinking glasses with Warwick and Astria. They were laughing, not a laugh of relief, but a laugh of triumph. They were celebrating a lucky escape that was actually a meticulously planned abandonment. My sister wasn't just fleeing the scene of my trauma. She was actively executing my character to ensure she remained the heir to a throne I had built. Have you ever been the villain in someone else's story just so they could play the hero? The distant hum of the hospital began to fade as I watched them toast to my demise. I looked at my handcuffed wrist and then back at the screen. They thought they had buried me. They forgot that I was the one who had spent years digging into the numbers, the secrets, and the lies that held this family together. My mother's voice on the 911 call played in my head, a cold loop of betrayal. Looking back, I should have seen the cracks in the foundation long before the crash. I had been so busy being the pillar that I forgot to check if the roof was still worth holding up. A pair of polished leather shoes appeared in the doorway, the sound of their steady pace breaking the silence. Reeve entered the room, his expression devoid of the pity I dreaded. He nodded to the officer. A subtle exchange of authority that signaled my first moment of protection. He didn't say a word at first. He simply walked to the bedside table and placed a cup of coffee there. The scent of dark roast was the most beautiful thing I had ever smelled. It was the scent of a world that still made sense. "The blood work will be back within the hour," Reeve said, his voice a low, calming baritone. "HIPAA laws will keep it from the police until I've reviewed the results, and we decide how to present them. You are clean, Karis. We both know that." I took a sip of the coffee, the heat grounding me. "I'm not looking for revenge, Reeve," I whispered, looking at the handcuffs that still bound me. "I'm looking for the version of me they didn't manage to kill in that car. Kindness is a gift I gave them for years. Self-respect is a gift I'm finally giving myself." I looked at him, the weight of the metal on my wrist feeling lighter as the iron in my resolve solidified. "How is the other driver?" I asked. Reeve paused, a flicker of genuine respect crossing his face. "He's stable, in another wing of the hospital." "Why?" I looked out at the Houston skyline, the sun finally breaking through the clouds. "Because he was a pawn in a game he didn't know he was playing. I want to make sure his medical bills are covered. My father's war shouldn't ruin a stranger's life." Even in the middle of a betrayal that would have broken most, I couldn't let go of the humanity that my parents had discarded. I looked at Reeve, my mind already 3 steps ahead of the family currently flying toward the city of light. The truth was a slow-burning fuse, and I was the one who controlled the spark. I leaned back against the thin hospital pillow, the mechanical beep of the monitor no longer sounding like a ticking clock, but like a heartbeat returning to its natural rhythm. It was day 3. The sterile white light reflected off the polished surface of Reeve's briefcase, making my eyes ache. I lay there, Karis, the daughter who was supposed to be a memory, watching a fax machine in the corner of the nurse's station spit out a document with agonized slowness. Every page that fell felt like a clod of dirt being tossed onto my coffin. It wasn't just a document. It was a cold signature sent from a hotel suite in Paris, 1,000 miles away from my pain. I watched through the glass partition as the head nurse read the papers, her expression shifting from professional focus to profound discomfort. And she looked at me, then quickly away. I didn't need to be a mind reader to know what my father had done. Warwick had signed the order. Claiming I had no viable quality of life, he had requested the hospital initiate comfort care only. In the cold language of medical ethics, he was requesting they pull the plug. He wasn't just abandoning me in the rain anymore. He was trying to legally erase the only witness to his cowardice. He wanted a funeral he wouldn't have to attend. I felt a chill that no hospital blanket could touch, a deep, cellular realization that the bond of blood had been surgically severed. I didn't cry. My grandfather always said that he who has a why to live can bear almost any how. My why had shifted. I was no longer fighting to be a daughter. I was fighting to be the evidence. My family didn't want me to recover because my recovery was their conviction. As I lay there, listening to the ethics committee gather in the hall, I realized my silence had to end. I wasn't a tragedy. I was a reckoning. Reeve moved with the precision of a man who dealt in certainties. He didn't just walk into the room, he occupied it. With a sharp, decisive motion, he slammed a counter-injunction onto the nurse's station. the sound echoing like a gunshot in the quiet ward. I forced my eyes open, focusing every ounce of my will on the hospital administrator standing at the foot of my bed. I needed them to see the iron behind the injuries. I needed them to see Karis. Under Texas law, capacity is everything. Reeve stood by my side, his presence a shield against the clinical death my father had scripted. "My client is cognizant," Reeve stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "She is oriented. Her medical power of attorney is hereby revoked." I looked the administrator in the eye, my gaze unfaltering. "My father's signature is a request for a funeral I am not ready to attend," I said, the words rasping but clear. "I revoke all his rights, effective immediately. I am the only one who speaks for Karis Wilson." The room seemed to recalibrate. The oppressive weight of the comfort care order evaporated, replaced by the sharp, a stinging reality of a legal war. I watched the administrator retreat, the paperwork that was supposed to end me, now nothing more than scrap. I looked at Reeve, my breathing shallow but steady. "I don't blame my father for his fear," I told him, loud enough for the staff to hear. "I only blame him for acting on it at the expense of my life. I forgive the man for being weak, but I will never again trust the father." What is the moment you realized you were truly alone, and instead of breaking, you finally felt free? When the room cleared, Reeve dimmed the lights. He opened a sleek, encrypted tablet, the glow illuminating the sharp lines of his face. "They thought they took everything," he whispered, "but they're not as smart as they think they are." He pressed play. The grainy and night vision footage from the accident began to roll in high definition. It was the 360-degree hidden camera I'd installed in the SUV's rearview mirror. My family never knew about it. It was a private security prototype I'd been testing, linked directly to my personal cloud server. The footage was a masterclass in betrayal. I watched the calculated movement of the truck, the impact that nearly ended me, and then the aftermath. There was Astria, her face illuminated by her phone screen as she reported me for a crime I didn't commit. There was Valora, her laugh audible even through the glass as she tucked the whiskey bottle into my seat. They walked away without looking back, their silhouettes disappearing into the Texas rain like ghosts. The receipts were finally in my hand. Everything they had built, their reputations, their wealth, and their lies, rested on a foundation that I now held the power to shatter. Reeve looked at me, his finger hovering over the send icon to the district attorney. "Do we end this now?" he asked. I watched my mother on the screen, her practiced facade of terror during the 911 call, and I felt a strange, icy sense of peace. "Not yet," I replied. "A hunter doesn't fire the moment they see the prey. They wait until the prey thinks they've already won." They had enjoyed their champagne in Paris. They had celebrated my demise. I would let them keep celebrating until the very moment they landed back on Texas soil. I thought of the truck driver, the man Warwick had used as a weapon. "Reeve, find out who that driver was," I commanded. "I want his family notified that his medical bills will be handled. He was a pawn, but his children shouldn't suffer for my father's sins." I was setting a boundary, not just for my family, but for my own soul. I refused to let their toxicity turn me into a version of them. I watched my sister's smirk on the high-definition screen and felt a quiet power rising within me. They had given me a death sentence, but they had forgotten that I was the one who owned the ink. The silence in Reeve's office wasn't the heavy, suffocating kind I had felt in the ICU. It was a sharp silence, the kind that exists in the eye of a storm. I sat in my wheelchair, my back straight, my gaze fixed on the glowing monitor. Across the Atlantic, the evening sun was setting over the Seine, casting long, elegant shadows across the Champs-Élysées. My family was basking in that golden light, as oblivious to the fact that the foundations of their world were already beginning to crack. True power isn't about raising your voice. It's about holding the keys while your enemy thinks they've already broken the lock. I held the keys, and I was finally ready to turn them. The video call invitation flashed on my screen like a taunt. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before clicking accept. Valora's face filled the frame, glowing with the artificial radiance of a woman who had spent the morning in a Parisian spa. She was clinking a baccarat crystal glass against the backdrop of the Eiffel Tower, her smile a jagged line of triumph. "Karis, darling," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I'm so glad to see you're mobile. We just finished a lovely lunch. The snails were divine. Though I doubt you're eating anything more exciting than lukewarm Jell-O." Warwick joined the frame, leaning over Valora's shoulder with a smug grin that made my skin crawl. He didn't ask about my surgery or my recovery. Instead, he brandished a thick folder of papers toward the camera. "We just finished the signing, Karis. The French conglomerate was very impressed with your work. Of course, since you're officially a drunk driver facing a felony, we had to handle the paperwork for you. Consider this your early inheritance. We're just collecting what you owed us for 27 years of housing and reputation." I watched them, my expression an iron mask of stoicism. They had used my forged digital signature to sell my proprietary AI financial models. They were selling my brain while they waited for my heart to stop. Valora leaned closer, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Don't bother with your justified indignation, little darling. By the time you get out of Houston jail, if you ever do, these patents will be long gone. We've rewritten the story. You're a pathetic, alcoholic failure. We're a broken family trying to mend things." I felt a familiar surge of rage in my chest, but I suppressed it. I let them speak. I let them gloat. I recalled a wise piece of advice my grandfather had whispered to me years ago. "Wolves don't howl when they're hunting." Would you forgive your sister for stealing the fruits of your life's labor while you were lying in a hospital bed? Or would you let the law do what mercy cannot? The call ended with Valora's high-pitched laugh, leaving me in the quiet hum of the Houston office. Reeve looked at me, his eyes questioning. "They think they've won, Karis. They've already started the smear campaign." He showed me a notification on his phone. Valora had used her massive social media following to leak a fake audio recording, a deep fake of my voice admitting I hated my parents and planned to ruin them. Within minutes, my firm had sent a formal termination notice. Moral turpitude. My career, the one I had built with blood and sleepless nights, was being dismantled in real time. I didn't panic. I didn't even blink. I simply reached out and pulled the keyboard toward me. "They forgot one thing, Reeve," I said, my voice as cold as a mountain stream. "They think wealth is a number in a bank account. I know wealth is the infrastructure that moves it. I was the super admin for every trust, every corporate shell, and every secondary account my family used. And I had built the digital pipes they drank from. And I knew exactly how to shut the valve. My fingers flew across the keys in a rhythmic dance of digital warfare. I wasn't just closing accounts. I was executing a security protocol I had written years ago as a contingency. Under U.S. banking law, a primary account holder has the absolute right to suspend subaccounts and reported cards upon suspicion of unauthorized use from a high-risk foreign IP address. I labeled every transaction from Paris as suspected fraud. With a single heavy strike of the Enter key, I effectively erased their ability to exist in the modern world. I watched through a remote security ping as the drama unfolded at the Hôtel de Crillon. The cinematic transition was jarring, from the quiet of Houston to the gilded chaos of a Parisian lobby. As I could see the concierge, polite but immovable, sliding a massive $15,000 bill across the marble counter. Astria reached for her black card with practiced arrogance, but the machine let out a sharp, red beep of rejection. Her face turned from a Mediterranean tan to a ghostly white as she tried a second card, then a third. All declined. All frozen. I picked up my phone and sent one short professional text to Valora. I didn't lose my job, Valora. I retired. You, however, just lost your credit limit. Have a nice night in Paris. I watched the remote feed as hotel security moved in, their expressions no longer deferential. The invincible Warwicks were suddenly being questioned by French authorities about the legitimacy of their funds and their inability to pay a luxury bill. The humiliation was total, and it was legally sound, and it was profoundly satisfying. I turned to Reeve, my breathing finally evening out. Set aside a portion of the frozen funds, I commanded. I want the truck driver's medical bills paid in full today. My father used that man as a pawn, but his family shouldn't go hungry because of it. Reeve nodded, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. You're being very generous, Karis. I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. I am setting a boundary, Reeve, not a fire. They chose to walk into the cold. I'm just making sure I don't become the monster they want me to be. As the sun began to set over Houston, a new notification appeared on Reeve's screen. His brow furrowed as he read it. Warwick isn't done yet, he whispered. He's just contacted a shady realtor in the Woodlands. He's trying to sell your penthouse while you're still in this wheelchair. The air in the room grew cold again. The war for my professional life was over, but the war for my sanctuary had just begun. I closed my laptop, the silence of the room finally feeling like a victory. I knew that the family who left me for dead was about to realize that dead men and abandoned daughters don't pay the bills. The office was a fortress of glass and steel, suspended high above the glittering arteries of downtown Houston. From this height, the city looked like a circuit board, humming with a life that felt increasingly distant. I sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, the morning light cutting across my lap, my fingers resting on the smooth silver handle of my cane. It was day 7. The air in the room was cool, filtered, and clinical, a stark contrast to the thick, humid chaos I knew was brewing elsewhere. I had spent years being the quietest person in the room. I had spent decades being the one who smoothed the wrinkles and paid the bills. But the silence I carried now wasn't one of submission. It was the silence of a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A movement on the large security monitor caught my attention. A silver luxury sedan was idling in the driveway of my penthouse in the Woodlands. A man in an ill-fitting suit stepped out, clutching a for sale sign as if it were a scepter. Behind him, Warwick's voice crackled through the intercom system. My father, desperate for the cash I had frozen in Paris, trying to sell my sanctuary while he thought I was still a prisoner of my own body. He believed Karis was still legally silent, and he believed I was still a daughter who could be traded for a debt. Reeve pulled up behind them in a black sedan, the motion fluid and deliberate. He stepped out, his posture radiating a quiet, terrifying authority. In slow motion, I watched him survey Liz Pendon's notice directly to the realtor. The man's face went pale. The sign remained unplanted. Under Texas real estate law, a notice of pending litigation is a death sentence for a sale. It taints the title so thoroughly that no bank will touch it. I watched my father's silhouette behind the gates, his frantic gestures a shadow play of greed. A house is just bricks and mortar, Reeve, I whispered into the empty office. They can try to sell the roof over my head, but they can't sell the ground I stand on. A person's true home is their dignity. I didn't feel anger. I felt a cold and surgical detachment. The digital newspaper layout was already open on the second screen. The cursor hovered over the publish button like a guillotine. This was the most difficult part of the hunt, playing dead to see who would celebrate. It was a test of the heart I no longer wanted to take. With a short, sharp nod from me, Reeve clicked the button. The single, heavy heartbeat of the sent notification echoed through the room. The obituary was live. It was strategic. It was a masterpiece of bait. It spoke of a tragic passing, a vacant estate, and a multi-million-dollar life insurance policy ready for immediate probate. I watched the reaction from a low-budget motel on the outskirts of Paris via the social media pings. There was no silence. There were no black veils of mourning. Instead, Valora posted a black-and-white photo of a sunset with a caption about inheriting a legacy of strength and honoring her sister's wishes. Within an hour, they had booked the first flight back to Houston. They weren't coming for a funeral. They were coming for a payout. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from nothing while others waited for you to fail, you know that the greatest strength is staying silent until the right moment. The morning dragged on, but I had one more piece of business to settle before the plane landed. I sat at the mahogany desk and pulled a leather-bound checkbook from the drawer. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the room. I focused on the payee line. It was made out to the family of the truck driver Warwick had hired to end me. He had been a pawn, and a man driven by a different kind of desperation. While my family was rushing to the airport to claim my corpse, I was ensuring that man's children had their college funds secured. He was a piece in my father's game, I told Reeve. But his children shouldn't pay for the king's sins. I looked at my reflection in the dark monitor. I wasn't wearing a hospital gown or a patient's wristband. I was wearing a charcoal gray power suit, the fabric sharp and unforgiving. I adjusted my collar, my movements precise. I remembered a sentiment that had once seemed like a cliché. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. My strength wasn't in the wealth I had clawed back. It was in my refusal to become as cruel as the people who shared my blood. I am not my father's daughter today, I said, my voice echoing in the vastness of the office. I am the justice he tried to flee. Reeve checked the flight tracker on his tablet. AF034 from Paris is 30 minutes from landing at IAH, he said. I stood up, my muscles tight but responsive. The cane clicked rhythmically on the hardwood floor as I walked toward the door, a steady, deliberate countdown. Each step felt like a drumbeat. Each breath felt like a promise kept. I had spent my life as the shadow in their glory. I had been the invisible pillar holding up their gilded world. Today, the pillar was walking away, and the world was about to come crashing down. I watched the small plane icon on the screen creep closer to the Houston coastline. It looked so small, so insignificant against the vast blue of the map. Warwick, Astria, and Valora were in those pressurized cabins, likely clinking glasses one last time, dreaming of the house and the money they thought was finally theirs. They expected to step off that jet and find an empty penthouse and a grieving lawyer. Instead, they would find a ghost waiting to collect a debt that could never be repaid with money. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. I stepped inside and the elevator began its descent. My heart pounded steadily, calmly. The long, painful pressure of the past week had finally transformed into weariness. I wasn't afraid to face it. I looked forward to its clarity. The rain had stopped. The Texas sun began to pierce through the morning fog, illuminating the road to the airport. I gripped my cane tightly, feeling its solid, unwavering weight. The prey had escaped. The predator was in position. I stood near a massive concrete pillar in Terminal D, my back straight, my power suit sharp and charcoal gray. I wasn't Karis the victim today. I was Karis the witness. I watched the automatic doors of the international arrivals gate slide open in a smooth, mechanical motion. Warwick, Astria, and Valora emerged like vultures descending on a battlefield they thought they had already won. They were dressed in designer black mourning clothes, their eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses, moving with a predatory anticipation masked by fake grief. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of their rolling suitcases against the polished marble floor. It was a cold, expensive sound. They were already dividing the spoils of a death that hadn't happened. My heart felt heavy, not with anger, but with a profound, stoic sadness for them. "Valora, stop fidgeting with your phone," I heard Astria hiss as they drew closer. We need to look devastated. The probate hearing is in 48 hours. Valora huffed, at her voice dripping with vanity. This whole death thing is ruining my aesthetic for the season, Mother. I had to cancel my yacht shoot. Warwick grunted, looking around the terminal with a frown. Where is that lawyer? Karis was spiteful even in the end, not leaving better arrangements for her mourning parents. No limousine? It's an insult. I watched them, realizing that some people are so poor, all they have is money. They didn't see the world. They only saw the price tags attached to it. I had already mourned the family I thought I had, and looking at them now, I felt only a quiet clarity. I turned to Reeve, who stood beside me like a shadow. Ensure the house in the woodlands isn't foreclosed on while they're away, I whispered. Not for them, because it was my grandfather's pride. I want justice, Reeve, but I don't want to destroy our history. Would you have watched them fall from the shadows, or would you have stood in the light to face them one last time? Suddenly, every digital advertisement screen in Terminal D flickered and turned to static. The air in the terminal seemed to thicken. Then, the 360-degree night vision footage from the accident began to play on the massive 20-foot billboards. The audio was piped through the terminal's public address system, crisp and undeniable. Thousands of passengers stopped and stared. They saw Astria's cold face as she reported me. They heard Valora's mocking laugh. The invincible Warwicks were frozen in the middle of the terminal as their true nature was broadcast to the world. I stepped out from behind the pillar, standing tall and unsupported by my cane for a brief, powerful moment. You reported a drunk driver, Mother, I said, my voice echoing through the silent hall. But the camera only found 3 people who abandoned their own blood in the dark. Warwick tried to lung toward me, his face turning a mottled purple, shouting about filial duty and betrayal. Reeve stepped forward, a wall of legal authority. Duty is earned through love, Warwick, I responded. You traded yours for a first-class ticket to France. I am simply returning the favor. Under the Federal Travel Act and Texas failure to render aid statutes, their flight had triggered an immediate federal arrest warrant. A phalanx of FBI agents and state troopers moved in, their boots echoing with a rhythmic authority. The metallic snick of handcuffs closing around their wrists was the most honest sound I had heard in years. Then Valora's designer luggage fell over, spilling French silks and expensive perfumes across the floor. Astria screamed that we were family, but I maintained a calm, quiet power. I am not doing this to hurt you, Astria, I said, looking her in the eyes. I am doing this to protect the version of me that you tried to kill. Today, I am finally moving out of a house that was never a home. I handed Reeve the documents to establish the Karis Foundation for victims of hit-and-run accidents, funded by the very wealth they tried to steal. The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. I watched them being led away in silence, their silhouettes shrinking against the vastness of the terminal. I turned my back on the gate, looking toward the exit where the Texas sun was shining through the glass. But forgiveness is not about giving them a second chance. It is about not letting their poison live in your heart any longer. I felt the weight of the last week finally lift from my shoulders. I wasn't a shadow anymore. I was the light. I walked out of the airport and into the warm Houston air, breathing in the scent of rain and freedom. The pine trees swayed in the distance, a green promise of a life that was finally mine to live. I had lost a family, but standing there in the sun, I knew I had finally, truly found myself.